On January 11, 1942, a torpedo tore through the hull of a U.S. Army freighter 20 miles off the coast of Bali. The ship didn't sink, not right away. For 21 years, the USAT Liberty sat broken and abandoned on a black sand beach, rotting under the equatorial sun, its cargo still inside. Then in 1963, something happened that no one had predicted. The wreck slid into the sea during a volcanic eruption, and when divers finally found it again, it had become something else entirely. The Liberty was never supposed to be in those waters. Built in 1918 as a design 1037 cargo hauler in Kearney, New Jersey, she was a leftover from the First World War. Outdated, slow, and repurposed for wartime logistics nobody wanted to talk about. Her hull was riveted steel, 409 feet from bow to stern, with a beam just over 54 feet. She could make maybe 11 knots in good weather. That was fast in 1918. By 1942, it made her a sitting duck. She'd spent the interwar years shuffling between mothballs and minor freight runs, the kind of ship that only moved when there was no better option. But by January 1942, there were no better options. The war had consumed everything with a hull and an engine. So the Liberty was pulled out of reserve, fitted with deck guns she was never designed to carry, and loaded in Australia with rubber bales and railway parts, officially bound for the Philippines. The manifest was straightforward: industrial supplies for Allied infrastructure projects, railway bogies, wheel assemblies, meant for reconstructing bombed-out lines, rubber meant for tires, seals, medical equipment, standard wartime freight, the kind of cargo that filled holds on 100 other ships making similar runs across the Pacific. But her route took her through the Lombok Strait, a narrow channel between Bali and Lombok, deep inside what had just become Japanese-controlled waters. Less than 2 months after Pearl Harbor, Japan had swept through the Dutch East Indies like a brush fire, seizing oil fields, airstrips, and ports. The Allies were scrambling. Supply lines were collapsing faster than they could reinforce them. Neutral ports were turning hostile. Ships that a month earlier could transit freely were now running a gauntlet. The Lombok Strait wasn't the safest route. It wasn't even the fastest. But it was one of the few deep-water passages left that hadn't been completely locked down by Japanese air patrols. Convoys were using it because they had to, not because they wanted to. The Liberty was rated for roughly 7,400 tons of cargo. She was carrying rubber, railway equipment, and other war materials desperately needed in the Philippines. Nothing unusual for a transport vessel in early 1942. But the seas she was crossing were crawling with Japanese submarines, and the I-166 was hunting. The torpedo that hit her wasn't random. The Japanese submarine I-166 knew what it was hunting. She'd been tracking Allied supply routes through the Lombok Strait for days, waiting for a target that mattered. The I-166 was a long-range fleet submarine, one of the Kaidai-class boats built for extended patrols. Her captain had orders to interdict supply lines, and the Liberty fit the profile perfectly. A slow-moving freighter, lightly escorted, carrying war materials through a choke point. The attack was methodical. The I-166 stalked the Liberty for hours, positioning herself for a clean shot. When the torpedo launched, it was aimed with precision, not at the bow or the stern, but amidships, where the cargo holds met the engine room. A kill shot. But if the attack was expected, why did the ship survive long enough to reach shore? The Liberty should have gone down in minutes. The torpedo struck amidships at approximately 4:15 a.m., punching through the starboard hull just below the waterline. It detonated inside Hold 2, between the forward cargo bay and the engine room. Survivors reported the blast lifted men off their feet, buckled steel plating inward like paper, and flooded 2 cargo holds almost immediately. The explosion echoed across the dark water. Black smoke poured from the vents. The ship listed hard to port within seconds. Standard protocol said she'd capitate and sink within the hour. A torpedo hit amidships in a ship built in 1918 with riveted seams and no modern damage control systems should have been a death sentence. The water temperature was warm, over 80 degrees, but the Lombok Strait runs deep. If she went down there, she'd go down for good. No salvage. No survivors pulled from the water hours later. Just another name on the list of ships lost in the Pacific. She didn't. Escorted by the U.S. destroyer Paul Jones and the Dutch destroyer Van Ghent, the Liberty limped northeast under tow, hemorrhaging oil and listing hard to port. The destroyers had been part of a small convoy escort group, moving through the strait on high alert. When the Liberty took the hit, they closed in, laid down a depth charge pattern to drive off the I-166, and rigged emergency tow lines. Through the pre-dawn darkness and into the morning, they dragged the gutted freighter through hostile waters, expecting her to break apart at any moment. The tow cables were jury-rigged, secured to deck cleats that weren't designed to take that kind of strain. The Liberty's bow kept dipping under the waves. Water poured through the torn hull. The crew worked pumps by hand, bailing out compartments faster than the ocean could fill them. The crew beached her deliberately in Tulamben Bay, a shallow cove on Bali's volcanic northeast coast. The bay had a black sand beach, steep volcanic slopes, and no port infrastructure. It was remote, it was quiet, and it was the only option. The crew ran her aground as close to shore as they could, then abandoned ship. All hands survived, not a single man lost. The Liberty settled onto the beach, partially submerged, her bow facing the sea, her stern wedged into the sand. The Navy declared her a total loss and left her there. Salvage crews worked quickly to recover what they could: railway parts, rubber that hadn't been too badly damaged by seawater, equipment that could be repurposed or sent on to where it was needed. But the hull itself was finished, too damaged to repair, too remote to tow anywhere useful. She was stripped of anything valuable and abandoned. The official story ends there: a lucky escape, a damaged freighter, and a footnote in the chaos of early 1942. One ship lost out of hundreds, a rounding error in a war that would sink tens of thousands of vessels before it ended. The crew was reassigned. The destroyers moved on. The Liberty became a piece of abandoned wreckage on a forgotten beach, but what happened to her after that is where the story gets strange. For 21 years, the Liberty sat in Tulamben Bay, visible from shore, her rusted hull a landmark for local fishermen. She was half submerged, canted to one side, her decks exposed at low tide. The bow pointed out toward the strait, as if she were still trying to reach the Philippines. Rust streaked down her sides. Barnacles encrusted the hull below the waterline. Seabirds nested in the superstructure. Kids played on her. Villagers stripped whatever metal they could pry loose. Brass fittings, copper wire, anything that could be sold or repurposed. The jungle crept down to the waterline. Vines grew through the portholes. She became part of the landscape, a scar from a war that had moved on and left her behind. Then, on March 17, 1963, Mount Agung, Bali's active volcano, 6 miles inland, erupted. The blast killed over 1,000 people. Lava flows reached the coast. Ash fell for days, thick enough to collapse roofs and bury entire villages. The sky turned black. The ground shook for weeks. Aftershocks rippled through the island, some strong enough to crack temple foundations and split roads. Tulamben Bay, sitting at the base of Agung's northeastern flank, took the brunt of it. Pyroclastic flows poured down the slopes, incinerating everything in their path. The beach shifted. The ocean surged. Tidal waves triggered by underground tremors rolled through the bay, dragging debris out to sea and dumping it back on shore in tangled heaps. When the tremors stopped and the ash settled, Fishermen returned to the bay and found the wreck had moved. The hull had slid off the beach and into deeper water, pushed by the seismic activity and the reshaping of the seafloor beneath it. What had been a beached relic was now submerged, resting on a slope just meters from shore. It took another decade before recreational divers, arriving with Bali's early tourism boom in the 1970s, began exploring the Liberty systematically. What they found was a wreck transformed. The ship now rests approximately 15 to 30 meters from the beach, in water ranging from 3 to 30 meters deep. It's accessible as a shore dive, one of the easiest wreck dives in the world. No boat required, just fins, a mask, and a walk into the surf. The rediscovery wasn't forensic, it was accidental. Divers exploring the reef for marine life stumbled onto deck guns, boilers, and cargo holds, all encrusted in coral and swarming with fish. Parrotfish, groupers, barracuda. The wreck had become an artificial reef, one of the richest dive sites in the region. But what they found was a ship that had been claimed by the ocean. The bow section had shifted deeper, resting at around 28 meters. The stern sat more upright, closer to shore. The midsection, where the torpedo had hit, was twisted and splayed open, but still recognizable. Inside the holds, the railway parts were where they'd always been, scattered across the deck plating like massive steel bones. Coral had grown over the wheel assemblies, turning them into abstract sculptures. The rubber that had once filled the holds was mostly gone, broken down by salt water, scavenged over the years, or simply disintegrated. What remained were fragments, pieces embedded in the wreckage, covered in marine growth. Indonesian authorities began formal surveys in the 1990s, mapping the site with sonar and working with dive operators to document what was left. By then, decades of exposure and diver traffic had taken their toll. The ship was deteriorating. Coral growth obscured structural details. Metal corroded. Sections collapsed. The Liberty is now one of the most dived wrecks in the world, but it's also one of the most fragile. Every year, tens of thousands of divers descend on Tulamben to explore the site. It's marketed as an easy wreck dive, suitable for beginners, a living reef teeming with life. Dive shops line the beach. Tour operators run daily trips. The wreck is a postcard, a bucket list item, a feel-good story about nature reclaiming the machinery of war. Divers swim through the holds, photograph the coral-encrusted boilers, and surface with stories about the fish they saw. But the wreck itself is disappearing. Coral growth has obscured structural details. Diver traffic accelerates corrosion. Fins kick up silt. Hands grab onto fragile metal. Every year, more of the Liberty crumbles into the sand. What was once a nearly intact wartime freighter is becoming a pile of unidentifiable debris. Sections of the hull collapse. Deck plating falls away. The wreck is eating itself. Marine archaeologists and conservationists have studied the site extensively. What they found is a ship that tells a straightforward story. A wartime freighter, torpedoed in hostile waters, beached and abandoned, then reclaimed by a volcanic island and the sea. There are no hidden compartments, no unexplained anomalies, no mysteries buried under volcanic rock. Just a ship that was in the wrong place at the wrong time and became part of the landscape in a way no one expected. Survivor accounts from the crew describe a routine, if harrowing, torpedo attack. A sudden explosion, chaos, damage control, a desperate tow to the nearest beach, an evacuation, relief that everyone made it out alive. The cargo manifests match what divers have found: railway parts, rubber, standard wartime supplies. Naval records confirm it as a routine wartime loss, a transport torpedoed in a combat zone, salvaged where possible, abandoned as a total loss, filed away and forgotten until divers rediscovered it decades later. The Liberty's legacy isn't about what sank her. It's about what she became after. A beached wreck claimed by a volcanic eruption. A coral reef teeming with life. A dive site visited by thousands every year. A physical reminder of a war that reshaped the world, slowly dissolving back into the ocean. Indonesian dive operators treat the site with care, but it's fragile. Environmental groups monitor the wreck's condition. Conservationists work to balance tourism with preservation. The question isn't what secrets the Liberty is hiding. It's how much longer she'll be there at all. Families of the crew, those still alive, remember the Liberty as the ship their fathers and grandfathers survived. Not a mystery, not a conspiracy. Just a ship that got hit, limped to shore, and somehow became one of the most famous wrecks in the world. The National Archives has files on the Liberty. Their standard wartime documentation, cargo manifests, damage reports, tow orders, salvage records, nothing redacted, nothing hidden, just the paperwork of a ship lost in a war that burned through vessels like kindling. The wreck sits there still, just off the beach at Tulamben, slowly crumbling into the sand. Coral grows over the steel. Fish dart through the holds. Divers explore the skeleton of a ship that was never supposed to matter this much. What the Liberty became is more interesting than what she was. A ship that survived a torpedo, sat on a beach for 2 decades, was moved by a volcano, and turned into a living reef. That's the real story. The Liberty's still down there, just offshore, becoming part of the island that claimed her. What else is hidden beneath the waves off Bali? That's another story.